Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Taliban have accused Kabul of killing 11 civilians, including 4 children, during raids in the various parts of Afghanistan's eastern Logar province. In a tweet, a spokesperson Zabiullah said 12 Taliban fighters were killed during clashes in the Charak district, while the group killed 17 government soldiers. Earlier, the Defense Ministry said Afghan forces killed 23 Taliban fighters in shelling and raids in Porak, Chavani and Charak districts of the Logar province. Taliban spokesman said Kabul administration made false statements regarding the incident. He said propaganda of inflicting more casualties on the group is far from the truth. In Pakistan, the death toll from the coronavirus outbreak has risen to 391 after another 6 people succumbed to the disease. The country has so far reported more than 17,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus, while over 4,300 people have recovered. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry data suggests that over 150,000 people could be infected with the virus by 30th of May. It said the graph of the cases, which is continuously rising, will flatten in June and start falling in July. The global death toll from COVID-19 has crossed 233,000, with over 3.2 million people infected. The WHO says the number of coronavirus infections has risen by 72,000 and deaths by 9,000 just in the past 24 hours. In the US, more than 2,000 people died overnight, with the death toll crossing 63,000. More in this report.
While the new coronavirus continues to infect tens of thousands worldwide every day, many countries believe the virus has passed its peak. Australia's vast Northern Territory has become the first in the country to lift major restrictions. In the UK, despite a rising number of deaths and criticism from his government's response, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will be setting out a lockdown exit strategy.
I will be setting out a comprehensive plan next week to explain how we can get our economy moving, one, how we can get our children back to school, back into childcare, second, and third, how we can travel to work and how we can make life in the workplace safer.
Meanwhile, a blame game over the origin and handling of the outbreak has created a divided world. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the leaders of the world need to rise to the occasion.
It is obvious the international community is divided in a moment where it would be more important than ever to be united. There is indeed a problem of leadership, or if you want, a disconnect between leadership and power. We see remarkable examples of leadership, but they are usually not associated with power. And where we see power, we sometimes do not see the necessary leadership. I hope this will be overcome sooner rather than later.
Elsewhere, with no new deaths, China's National Health Commission has reported 12 new infection cases.
Israeli helicopters have fired several missiles from the occupied Golan Heights on targets in southern Syria. Syrian state media says the attack caused limited material damage with no casualties. The outlet said 3 military posts were targeted in the Quneitra area on the border. Israel has not claimed the responsibility for the attack. Earlier this week, Israeli strikes killed 7 people in Damascus suburb. On Monday, Israeli Defense Minister Naftali Bennett said Tel Aviv will step up its campaign against Iran-linked forces in Syria. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said the military carried out the operations backed by air power in the Zab region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. State media said PKK militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Turkey has called on the UAE to abandon its hostile attitude towards Ankara. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hami Aksoy said Ankara has always respected the political unity and the territorial integrity of the Arab countries. Accuse said Turkey, who has constantly supported the UN-recognized government in Libya. He said the UAE's ugly and baseless allegations were an attempt to cover up its destructive policies. Accuse said Abu Dhabi is providing weapons, military equipment and funding to the putschists in Libya. He said the international community is well aware of the UAE's activities of disrupting peace in the region. Yesterday, UAE Foreign Ministry expressed its categorical rejection of the Turkish military intervention in support of the GNA. In Libya, the UN-recognized government of the National Accord says it conducted 5 airstrikes against Khalifa Haftar's forces near Tripoli. The GNA's military spokesman, Mohammed Kanunu, said the operation at Al-Wathia Air Base also targeted his weapons caches. Al-Wathia is regarded as a key airbase in the country and is second only to Mitiga Airport. Yesterday, Haftar declared a unilateral ceasefire in the holy month of Ramadan. The GNA rejected the truce, saying it does not trust Haftar forces and will continue to target the source of threat wherever it is. 10 soldiers have been killed and 3 others wounded after a bomb exploded in an armored vehicle in Egypt. In a statement, the military confirmed the attack in the northern Sinai region, but did not give more details. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack so far. Egypt's army has been fighting insurgents who have killed hundreds of police and soldiers in the Sinai Peninsula since 2013. Myanmar has dismissed allegations by the UN rights envoy that its military is committing war crimes in Rakhine State. A government spokesperson termed Yang Lee's investigation biased and said that rebels are carrying out the attacks. He also accused the group of attacking a World Health Organization vehicle in late April, killing the driver. Earlier, Lee warned that military's actions against the rebels may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. She urged the international community to prevent further atrocities. At least 25 people have been killed and 51 others wounded in clashes among armed groups in the Central African Republic. Communications Minister says 21 civilians were killed in the fighting in northeastern Ndele town. But UN workers says the Gula wing of the Popular Front for the Rebirth of the Central African Republic attacked the Runga faction. They said 100 Gulas entered the town wearing civilian clothes. There have been clashes between Runga and Gula in Ndele, which is under FPRC control since the start of the march. They are fighting for the control of the region's resources, including its vast diamond deposits. The United Nations has hailed the services of Pakistani peacekeepers in Congo. A spokesperson of the world body said Pakistani peacekeepers helped save hundreds of lives during deadly floods in Congo. The spokesperson said Pakistan is amongst the top contributors to the UN peacekeeping. The blog shared a video of Pakistani peacekeeper contributing to the African nation. The body acknowledged Pakistan's efforts of rescuing over 2,000 people stranded due to heavy floods in a Uvira region. Rain and flooding damaged thousands of houses and affected nearly 75,000 people in the country. US President Donald Trump has threatened China with new tariffs as he claimed seeing evidence linking COVID-19 to Wuhan. At a White House briefing, Trump said he is confident the virus may have originated in a Chinese virology lab, but declined to offer details. When asked if he will consider withholding US debt obligations to China in retaliation, Trump said he could do the same thing with tariffs.
Do it differently. I can do the same thing, but even for more money just by putting on tariffs. So I don't have to do that. You know, it's approximately $1 trillion, a little bit more as I understand it, $1 trillion. But we can do that in a I think probably a little bit of a more forthright manner.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says Chinese authorities are refusing to let them join the probe into the origin of COVID-19. Now, moving on, the US says it is hopeful that the UN Security Council will extend an arms embargo on Iran before it expires in October. In a news briefing, U.S. Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, said Washington had drafted a Security Council resolution on the issue. But Hook said Washington is not planning to move ahead quickly. with its push for the extension. He alleged Iran's sectarian violence and export of weapons in the principal driver of the instability in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Russia's ambassador to international organizations in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, says U.S. attempts to present itself as part of the JCPOA have no future. In a tweet, he said cynical approaches must be limited in order not to compromise the national policy to the worst extent. Washington needs 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by Russia and China or other permanent members to extend the ban. NATO says its air forces in northern Europe intercepted Russian military planes 3 times in the past 2 days. In a statement, the alliance's press office accused the Russian aircraft of violating NATO airspace. The statement said Polish fighter jets were scrambled on April 28th to identify a formation of 2 Russian Tu-160 long-range bombers. It said the formation was later intercepted again by fighters of the Royal Danish Air Force. The Russian Defense Ministry has argued all military flights operate in international airspace and strictly follow air laws. The Pentagon says the number of sexual assault reports in the armed services rose 3% last year. In a report, the Defense Department said there were 7,825 sexual assault reports involving service members as victims or subjects in 2019. This is a 3% increase from 2018. The Pentagon said the increase in complaints cannot be characterized as an increase in assaults. Confidential disclosures without starting an official investigation saw a 17% increase from last year with 2,126 reports. The report said most sexual assaults in the military happen when unit climates are tolerant of other forms of misconduct. The non-governmental organization Protect Our Defenders said the spike in reports show a clear lack of faith in the chain of command. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Scores of Argentinians have protested the early release of some inmates from the overcrowded prisons due to the novel coronavirus outbreak. Protesters in the capital city of Buenos Aires stepped out onto their balconies and banged pots and pans in protest. Last Friday, inmates at a prison in Buenos Aires protested on the roof due to the fears of infection. Authorities have released over 700 prisoners to curb the spread of the contagion. President Alberto Fernandez has defended the move, saying he followed international recommendations. But the Argentinians said the hardened criminals will take advantage of the situation.
What makes no sense is to expect that rapists and murderers who haven't respected life, and not even mentioning those that committed genocide, who are accused of hundreds or thousands of cases, will take advantage of this situation to benefit themselves with house arrest, which they aren't going to respect.
A U.S. watchdog has warned that Afghanistan is likely facing a health disaster from the coronavirus. In a report to the U.S. Congress, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction said the pandemic threatens to derail stalled peace efforts. The report said Afghanistan's weak healthcare system, widespread malnutrition, and ongoing conflicts can create a havoc in the coming months. It said rising food prices in the impoverished country will likely worsen the crisis. Meanwhile, an NGO, Save the Children, said over 7 million children in Afghanistan are at a risk of hunger due to the pandemic. In its report, the charity said Kabul faces a perfect storm of hunger, disease and death unless the international community takes action. In Spain, the director of the Barcelona nursing home accuses authorities of failing to protect the country's elderly population from COVID-19 pandemic. He says the Spanish government failed to acquire testing kits needed to isolate the infected from the healthy population, leading to a national tragedy.
With over 24,000 deaths and 213,000 infection cases, Spain has experienced one of the worst outbreaks of the novel coronavirus anywhere in the world. Most of these deceased were elderly citizens. Nursing home director Manuel Veit says the government's lackadaisical response to the virus is to be blamed.
The authorities and the state took a long time to close these nursing homes. And not only that, but when we were closed, we did not have PPE kits. They did not recommend working with masks. For example, until you had contact with someone with symptoms, because since they did not perform PCR tests, you did not know if someone was positive, only if they had symptoms.
70% of the residents at Vate's nursing home became infected with COVID-19. He said most had no symptoms, making isolating the infected nearly impossible. Since then, Doctors Without Borders have stepped in to help, advising and training employees in how to keep residents safe.
At Doctors Without Borders, all we can say is that hopefully this lesson is learned in this crisis that we are still going through will remain in the form of guidelines for a contingency plan that we must all now have in Spain, in Europe, and throughout the world.
Several senior citizens have died in the country from suspected COVID-19 infection without being tested. Spain's Ministry of Health says there have been 16,510 deaths among the elderly citizens living in nursing homes where there were symptoms compatible with the virus.
The world is observing International Labour Day today to highlight the need for better working conditions. This year, May Day is being observed without any massive rallies due to the COVID-19 lockdown and movement restrictions. Global leaders and campaigners are posting Labour Day messages on social media to express solidarity. The International Labour Organization has recently warned that around half of the world's workforce risks losing their jobs.
Find and report in this monitor is that of the 2 billion informal workers of the world, about 1.6 billion have suffered massive damage to their ability to earn a living and to support themselves and their families because of the current COVID-19 crisis.
Global oil prices have soared as OPEC Plus led output cuts begin today, taking nearly 10 million barrels per day off the market till June. The cartel agreed to deal to support oil prices and offset a slump in fuel demand triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Brent crude jumped more than 4% to over $27 a barrel for July deliveries. U.S. benchmark WTI crude for June delivery climbed 7.3% to over $20 a barrel after gaining 25% in the previous session. U.S. Energy Information Administration data said crude inventories rose by 9 million barrels last week to over 527 million barrels. The rise in inventories defied forecasts of a 10.6 million barrel rise. The global oil demand has plunged by about 30 million barrels per day. Apple saw growth for the first 3 months of the year. Falling device sales in China were offset by demand for its streaming services due to the coronavirus lockdown. The tech giant's quarterly revenues climbed to $58.3 billion in the first quarter of 2020, $4 billion more than predicted. Apple's boss Tim Cook said the firm saw a record for streaming and phenomenal growth in the online store. Apple's home and accessories division, which produce Apple Watch and AirPods, rose 22.5% to $6.3 billion, while its services such as subscriptions to Apple Music and Apple TV jumped 16.6% to $13.3 billion. But Apple said iPhone sales for the quarter fell 7.2% to $28.9 billion. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.